Hey everyone, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is for you guys. This is my updated best build on every champion for Wild Rift. What I've done is I've taken the rank 1 players builds if I think they look relatively viable. Some rank 1 players put really troll builds up to make sure people can't copy them. But I've taken the rank 1 builds for every champion and I have then put them onto the loadout page so that you can see them. I've edited them ever so slightly where I feel it's going to be more applicable for the general user base. And then I'm going to list every champion, this time in alphabetical order. Thank you very much. I'm gonna give a shout out to him personally. The Legend 28. Last time I did this, he listed the champions in alphabetical order and timestamped them. I'm using his list to order this alphabetically so that you guys can start at Ahri and you can end up at, I think it's Z is the last one, or Ziggs. So you can end up at Z or Ziggs and it will go from A to Z. So I'm going to do all of that for every champion. There'll be some bookmark timestamps in the description where you can jump between some letters, but you should be able to, if you just go through alphabetically, A to Z, find the champion that you're looking for. But overall, it's a really big video. Put a lot of work into it, sort of searching for all the builds and editing them and making sure they looked okay. And I'm hoping this will help you for the next month. I'm going to try and do one of these a month to make sure we're keeping on top of the meta. And so I'm really hoping it's going to help. But let's get into it. Thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. Comment and like and subscribe, because if you do, on this video, you have a chance at winning one of 10 skins at the end of May. Make sure you do. I'm doing it for all my videos in May, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. But let's get straight into it. Ahri build. Okay, relatively simple. The only things that have changed really for Ahri is that a lot of the rank 1 to like 4 or 5 players put an early Rabadon's death cap in the build over something like the Infinity Orb second. So the build is this: Luden's Echo into Rabadon's death cap, into the cooldown boots, Lucidity boots with stasis, Infinity Orb, Void Staff as a 4th item to really amp that damage up, and then into a Morellonomicon later on if you get to it. Runes, Electrocute, Brutal, Regeneration, and Hunter Genius, which is really interesting to see regeneration, but I guess it does help a little bit with mana sustain in the lane as well. So there we go. That's Ahri. Let's move on. Okay, now Akali. Right, Akali is an interesting one. A lot of the rank 1 top 10 players use Haunting Guise as their first item. Now, that's not to say that they are not going to upgrade it to Liandry's, but what you're going to see on a lot of Akali players is going Haunting Guise into the Rabadon's death cap. So you actually don't complete Liandry's, you just pick up Haunting Guise and go to Rabadon's death cap. That's because the important part of Liandry's is the 2% damage gain per second over 5 seconds to a 10% damage gain overall. The burn is not so important to Akali because you're looking for burst damage. So you get the increase in damage, 10% increase in damage by being in combat, and then you go for Rabadon's death cap for the straight burst damage after that. So Haunting Guise into Rabadon's death cap, but you would complete Liandry's later on. I'd probably suggest completing Liandry's after your Infinity Orb, but it is not a priority. And this is why you might see a lot of Akalis have this Haunting Guise as their first item over something like the Liandry's. And it's a really interesting way of playing. Conqueror into Brutal, Spirit Walker, which you don't see a huge amount of, but just gives you that a little bit of extra health in lane, and the Honey Fruit rune as well. Just to, especially if you're in a matchup where you're into a ranged matchup in mid, Honey Fruit's going to help you sustain a little bit better. In the top lane, you might want to consider something like Regeneration and Hunter Genius. That might be a better combination for you, but this is the build that the rank 1 player is using right now, so I have put it into the list. So it's really difficult to give you a good, like 100% correct support build. And I want to profess this to you now, if you're watching this from the start. For any of the support builds, I'm going to tell you that the items are almost always negotiable. For Alistar, I think there are a couple of items that really stand out as being relatively common. The first one is Dead Man's Plate, and the second one is Zeke's Convergence. I think if you have Dead Man's Plate and Zeke's Convergence on Alistar, you are in a relatively good spot regardless of the way that you're playing the game, because Zeke synergizes so well with his ultimate, and Dead Man's gives you the extra movement speed and the extra kind of burst damage when you go for the engage. Your enchant can be one of many. It could be the Redemption, the Locket, it could be Glory, it could be Proto Belt, or the belt enchant. any of those four work in a given situation. You go for the belt enchant for the extra surprise engage. You go for the glory enchant to just run at people and make the engage happen that way. Redemption just for more overall teamfight presence, and lock it for protecting against a lot of burst damage. But again, as I said, like for Alistar, like you could have a Thornmail in this build, for instance, if you're going up against a lot of AD, and I will tell you this over and over again. Support items are always flexible, and it always really depends on the composition type and damage that you're facing. But Deadman's Plate and Zeke seem to be a really common 2-item combo for Alistar. The rest of the build is completely up to you depending on the types of damages that you're facing. But the runes have always remained consistent. Aftershock, into Weakness, into Loyalty, and Pack Hunter. That's a very standard Alistar rune support setup that you'll see across every elo. Let's move on. So I personally am a big fan of tank Amumu builds right now. The Sunfire Aegis into the Abyssal Mask into Gargoyle Enchant is going to make you super tanky in team fights. There is still a good AP build path that you can consider, which includes Liandry's Torment into things like the Ryalize. But I prefer tank Amumu because it's a little more consistent. I really like Frozen Heart with him as well, and I love Thornmail, especially into heavy AD comps. But of course, if you're not going into massive amounts of attack damage, you could also pick up something like a Force of Nature to make him tankier that way as well. Aftershock, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Mastermind generally tend to be the accepted runes here. You could change out Mastermind for Hunter Genius, because Amumu doesn't deal a ridiculous amount of damage to objectives, but it will help you take things like Baron a little quicker if you have the Mastermind, so that's why I quite like it on Amumu. So, carrying on. So for Annie, this is a build that I think works really well. A lot of the rank 1 builds didn't make a massive amount of sense to me, but the reason is that there's not many high elo players that play a lot of Annie. So often when you look at the rank 1 players of like underused champions, you're not going to see builds that are used in high elo. So this is a build that I think actually works quite well for her. Prioritizing the Hextech Proto Belt because you want that engage potential. Like one of the things that Annie really relies on is either Flash, Bear, Tibbers engage, or Proto Belt Tibbers engage when you have your stun up. So having that Proto Belt early on gives you the flexibility. But also you could go for the Ludens first, just depends on if you have that Flash up for the first Dragon fight or not. But the build that I love, that I think actually has a lot of merit, skip Rod of Ages. I think Rod of Ages is too slow for Annie. I think go for Ludens into Rabadon's Deathcap into Infinity Orb. You can have an insane amount of burst damage with this build, and then go for the Void Staff to finish it off. In terms of runes, Electrocute, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Hunter Genius, I think all work really well for Annie. They just synergize nicely with what she wants to do, just getting involved in as many kills as possible. You're looking for big multi-man bear stuns, so that's kind of why Annie is good in that regard. And actually, I think this build will do you really well at the lower elos, especially where Annie starts to really shine. So try Annie out. I think she's a strong mid laner, especially at lower levels of play where you can't, it's harder to punish in lane. So yeah, enjoy, give it a go. Ashe has remained relatively similar. I don't really rate Ashe very highly as an AD carry right now, but Blade of the Ruined King into RUNES is the very accepted build path for Ashe into Infinity Edge Rapid Fire Cannon. And then either Last Whisper or something like a GA could work really well. You might want to skip out on maybe the Rapid Fire Cannon, and go for a GA instead. It really depends on the situation, like if you're facing against a lot of dive. Honestly, not many people go for the Quicksilver enchant these days. A lot of people actually prefer to go for the Stasis because we're in a very assassin heavy meta. So I'm just swapping that around because it really depends on what you think is more important for you in the game. In terms of runes, Conqueror, no other rune that you want to go on Ashe. I actually switched out for Weakness. The reason I like Weakness is that Ashe's attacks slow, and so therefore you're going to get a natural 5% damage increase regardless of the stage of the game that you're at, which is actually really awesome for Ashe. And then obviously just going for the 2 Hunter runes to sort of improve and scale up throughout the game. So that's Ashe. Don't really rate her as an AD carry right now, but if you want to play her, this is a build that works very well. So this is an Aurelion Sol build that has been very popular recently as of late. A lot of people skipping out on the Rod of Ages now, just thinking that it takes a little too long to sort of get Aurelion Sol into a good spot, going straight in for Liandry's into Ryalize, which has kind of been the 2-item combo that we've seen a lot on Aurelion Sol. Now this is a version of the rank 1 player Aurelion Sol build. He has about 2,000 more points than anybody else on the European ladders. I've switched out a couple things though. He runs Gathering Storm, and I just want to talk about the maths of Gathering Storm. especially with the maths on Brutal as well, versus Gathering Storm, right? So Brutal gives you 14 AP and 2% magic penetration, and that 2% magic penetration is actually relatively important because it can increase your damage by a pretty decent amount. So that's 14 AP. You compare that to Gathering Storm, you're going to get 4 AP. So you're going to need to play at least 8 minutes on the game, which is, you know, most games do go 8 minutes to actually increase the value versus Brutal. Then you would need to go probably with the 2% magic penetration. I haven't worked it out, but you'd probably need to get another like 4 to 6 minutes to kind of outweigh a 2% magic penetration, especially versus the high magic resist targets. And even then, right? So let's say the game goes 20 minutes. You're gonna get 20 minutes, so you're gonna get 10 procs of 4 AP, which is 40 AP. You're getting about a blasting wand out of this rune. And by the time you get to 20 minutes, the blasting wand isn't making a ridiculous amount of difference. Let's say your average game goes, between 13 and 15 minutes. If you get to 12 minutes, you've got 24 AP, which is about less than 1 amp tome. So you're getting like 1 amp tome on average out of this rune, which is really not worth that much. That's why, in this particular build, I like weakness, because you're buying a Rhyalize, right? You're buying a Rhyalize Crystal Scepter. You know that you're going to have that in most games to combo with Liandry's. You're going to slow people with all of your abilities. Why not just take weakness? I know you lose out a little bit in the early game, but Gathering Storm doesn't give you any early game presence anyway. So therefore, weakness, I think, is a better choice, because you're going to get 5% damage increase once you have that Rhyalize active, and that's going to be massively more impactful than the AP that you get from Gathering Storm. I just don't think Gathering Storm's a very strong rune in general right now. The game has to go quite a long way for it to ever really get any value. Anyway, rant over about Gathering Storm. This Aurelion Soul build is otherwise really good. Okay, this is Blitzcrank. I think for Blitzcrank, you, again, support build, super flexible. I'll talk about it several times if you like me to. But what I really like on Blitzcrank is the combination between the Zeke's Convergence, which is great because his ultimate's off cooldown so often, so, you know, having that item, you're going to get a lot of value out of it. But I also really like Iceborne Gauntlet. It's an item that allows you to be a bit more carry orientated on Blitzcrank, and does allow you, once you make a hook, to apply a large slow in an area to make it more difficult for your target to escape. So Iceborne Gauntlet has a really good synergy with Blitzcrank in general, or you can just run at them and punch them, and, you know, you're going to get that knock up with this slow in the area as well. Runes, super similar to Alistair. A lot of tanky supports will have similar runes to this. Aftershock, Weakness, Loyalty, and Pack Hunter is pretty much the standard. So this is the rank 1 build for Braum. Again, Locket has kind of been taken out in favor of Redemption since the Locket nerfs, but it is, you know, this item works so well with Braum because you're going to be, like, essentially, in the most part, protecting an important target. So you're going to get value out of Protector's Vow, into Zeke's Convergence, Dead Man's Plate, and again, as I said before, support items are flexible. The only major change here is Font of Life. Don't build Aftershock on Braum. The only thing that can proc it is his ultimate, and you're never going to get any value. So Font of Life is good because you can impair the movement of a lot of enemies using Braum, either using his basic attack or his slow on his first ability or his ultimate, and it's going to allow them to heal a pretty decent amount off of, off a percentage of your max health. So Font of Life is the build that you want to go for Braum. Don't go Aftershock. Thank you. All right, Camille. This is Darkbreaker's Camille build. You guys will know him from YouTube. A very, very skilled player. One of the guys that I look to learn about Fiora and Camille and other sort of really strong top lane picks in general. Triforce into Sterak's Gauge, GA, Death Stance, and then goes for... I think that last item is probably flexible, Force of Nature. Probably flexible to be things like, you know, armor, like Dead Man's Plate if you wanted to, or Thorn Mail. Force of Nature just obviously very good against sort of any kind of AP damage. Some other Camille players do like to run things like the Blade of the Ruined King, but I think this is in general the best Camille build that you can kind of go for in most circumstances. Grasp of the Undying has been like the go-to Camille rune. This is really good into melee matchups that you know you're going to have short but strong trades with. If you're ever in a melee matchup that you think that you're going to have a longer trade with, then obviously Conqueror is something that you can consider. This build also works well for Jungle Camille, by the way. You don't have to just play it in the Baron lane. Jungle Camille can work well with this build. Champion, this is a high risk, high reward rune. I like it a lot, and in a lot of my build guides, I will put Champion as a rune that I do really like. But if you're in the jungle, or if you don't really feel comfortable, you can obviously go for Brutal. Spirit Walker has been put down here for for just give him the extra little bit of health and slow resistance, which is nice. And obviously the honey fruit rune to ensure that you're getting some sustain in lane. If you're in the jungle, obviously you can go Hunter Titan plus like Mastermind, or Hunter Titan plus Hunter Genius, for whatever. You can change things up for the jungle where you see fit. Okay, Darius. There's a lot of really weird Darius builds on the leaderboard. Trust me, I've looked through a lot of them. But this one still remains like a relatively good solo queue carry Darius build. Similar to the Camille, Triforce, Sterak's Death's Dance. You could go for 2 or 3 boot upgrades. There is Glory, Teleport, clearly obviously going to be important if you're looking to cross map. You could even go for the Hextech Belt, the Belt enchant. Because I've seen people use the belt into pull for Darius, which is a good way to find and engage. And then after those 3 items, you kind of want to think about some defensive options like Thorn Mail or Dead Man's Plate, which is, it's kind of like a half defensive, half aggressive option. GA is obviously something that's worth considering. Force of Nature. Again, it really depends. In fact, I think realistically, I'm actually going to change something on the fly here. I think GA is probably better than Randuin's in most circumstances for the Darius, but there we go. Relatively solid Darius carry build is going to get you through most situations in terms of runes. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and also the Honey Fruit enchant. You won't go wrong. Like, in general, you're never going to go wrong with Brutal. Brutal is a very standard, safe rune that you won't go too far wrong with. So all of these builds, if they include Brutal, it's because it's a safe option in that rune slot. So we just did a Diana guide recently, so the build hasn't changed from that. In terms of that rune, Brutal or Champion, you can see it there after Conqueror. You can go for whatever you feel more comfortable with. If you think that you can get an advantage with Champion in the early game, then go for it, because that 10% damage, the way that I always describe it is if that 10% damage that Champion gives me allows me to get 1 kill, or allows me to get a big dragon fight for my team, because I've got that 10% increased damage on my ultimate, then it's worth it, because it's going to allow me to snowball the game. If I'm not confident, and I think that I'm going to die, or I think that I might die in the laning phase, or I'm susceptible to ganks, then I'll go for Brutal to make sure I don't have a useless rune. Itemization, Rod of Ages, Nash's Tooth, into the Rabadon's Deathcap, Lichbane, and then also Miranomicon. It's good Diana build, very easy to make work. Go for it. Dr. Mundo, no longer an incredibly strong jungler. Some people are still playing him in the Baron lane where they can. And I think, he's not a particularly strong pick right now. That's the problem with Dr. Mundo. But is a pick that can definitely use Grasp of the Undying relatively well. So that's a good rune choice for him there. Grasp of the Undying. Champion or Brutal again. Regeneration and Honey Fruit. Mundo has a pretty weak early game. So Regeneration and Honey Fruit allow him to get through that. You just want to be able to get to your level 5. Pick up some resistances. I always slur that word really badly. Resistances, and then sort of get towards that big tanky status that we know him to be. In terms of itemization, Sunfire into Spirit Visage is a pretty good 1-2 item combo. Then you're going to want to pick up some armor, either in the form of plated steel caps, or you can go for Mercury Treads if you're going into heavy AP damage. Then you're going to want to pick up things like Thorn Mail, Warmogs, Randuins, even Force of Nature, obviously, if you're going into a lot more AP damage. Go with whatever suits you for the situation. Tank builds and support builds are always very flexible. Okay, Draven, this is a relatively solid build. Bloodthirst into Infinity Edge, into your Ravenous Boots, Last Whisper, Phantom Dancer, and GA. Last Whisper is really good, as a third item. You don't need a massive amount of attack speed on Draven early on, because he really revolves around just, A, using his Bloodlust to pump his attack speed, but also B, spinning axes are there to do like burst damage, and you don't necessarily need to be like base attacking as much as a regular AD carry. Rune choice, Conqueror, Champion, Hunter Titan, and Honey Fruit. Why do I like Champion on Draven? Draven doesn't want to die. If you die on Draven, you're already losing the point of the Champion. So if you're building up stacks and you die, it's almost like you're killing your win condition regardless, right? So going for Champion gives you 10% extra damage. It makes it much more likely that you're going to be able to get a kill and cash in your stacks. And if you cash in your stacks because of Champion, then the rune, even if you lose it later on, it becomes whatever, right? It doesn't matter if you lose the rune later on, because you've already given yourself that platform for success. So I think Champion just synergizes best with what Draven wants to do. If you're losing stacks and getting killed, the comeback mechanics of Draven do start to drop off. And then Brutal, by the time you get to the point where you may be able to come back, Brutal becomes relatively irrelevant anyway. So that's my thought process when it comes to this rune choice for Draven. But this is a good build if you're comfortable playing Draven. He's quite a hard AD carry to play. This one will work out very well for you. So the Evelynn rune choice and build choice has changed up a little bit as of late. A lot more people running Electrocute over Conqueror with Evelynn. And actually it's something that it's worth talking about. The value between Electrocute and Conqueror for Evelynn. And also the build has changed. If you look at the build, it's now Rabadon's Deathcap first item for just the pure burst damage coming from the jungle. And almost every top Evelynn player is doing Rabadon's Deathcap into Lichbane right now. So that's kind of like the 1-2. I don't mind the Proto Belt either, but obviously Stasis is another option for you. Proto Belt and Stasis are both good. Into Infinity Orb for that extra execute potential when you're looking to use your ultimate to kill people off. Void Staff, and then Morellonomicon. Or just Morellos. I should really just call it Morellos. Morellos is the short name for it. In terms of runes, again, okay, this is the choice between Conqueror and Electrocute. You know, the rest of the runes are standard, right, for jungle. The Brutal, Hunter Titan, Mastermind, relatively standard for jungle. But Conqueror versus Electrocute, the way you need to think about it is, obviously, Electrocute is, you can use it twice per minute. It gives you a really good scaling burst damage on a single target. And for Evelynn, what's your job? Most of the time, it's to kill a singular target, take out the AD carry, take out the enemy mage, whatever it is. But that's usually Evelynn's job, right? So you need to think about, does the damage that I get from Electrocute outweigh the value that I get from Champion when I get the increasing AP per stack, and then I'm using my hate spikes over and over again? For the most part, I think Electrocute is probably more useful, especially for snowballing, and that's why I think a lot of people are now starting to pick it up, because you need to snowball a little harder on Evelynn. But Champion still remains a relatively, or Conqueror, what am I saying Champion? Conqueror remains a relatively important rune if you're looking to play a more elongated team fight, or you think that you're going to be able to get to full stacks before actually going in and using your ultimate. But, you know, Electrocute remains a strong single target burst, but you do have to be very careful about target selection, because if you go into a team fight, you spam hate spikes and you proc Electrocute on the tank, you're going to lose the value of the rune, right? That's where Conqueror becomes a more nuanced discussion. Is if you don't think that you can kill the AD carry before proccing Electrocute on the wrong target, then Conqueror is going to be better for you overall. But Electrocute is much better if you're confident that you can find the target that you want at the start of the fight. So just some thoughts for rune selections on Evelynn there. Ezreal, one of the most popular AD carries right now, and his build really just hasn't changed in the last few, honestly, months. Manamune into Trinity Force, into whatever boot enchant you like. Blade of the Ruin King, Last Whisper, and then it really depends as your final item. I've been going off Death's Dance as the last item for Ezreal. I think a lot of people are now kind of favouring the Guardian Angel. If you ever get to that stage of the game, feel free to choose. Conqueror, I like Champion in the early game, but you might not like it. I just like Champion because it gives you that early poke damage. It can be especially useful at the first Drake fight. And Ezreal is so safe as an AD carry, like you shouldn't be dying that often. But I know that, you know, end of the day, if you're feeling less comfortable, then Brutal is always going to be the safer rune because it gives you just some flat AD that you can work with. Hunter Titan, and then Mana Flow Band to complement your Muramana and your Manamune. Cool. Next one. So this Fiora build is from a guy called Chosen Beast. I don't know. He said it has YouTube in his handle, so I'm assuming he's got a YouTube. Feel free to type in Chosen Beast YouTube to see him. He's the top ranked Fiora player in Europe by quite a margin, actually. Trinity Force into Death Dance, into Sterak's Guardian Angel, and he goes for Dead Man's Plate last. Interesting choice for Dead Man's Plate last. I think, again, that would be a rune, an item choice that I might consider depending on the types of damage that I'm facing. Like I might consider a Force of Nature or a Spirit Visage, for instance, against heavy AP comps. Conqueror, Brutal, Spirit Walker, Honey Fruit, and then just Flash Ignite. He's got 2 accounts as the top 2 Fioras on the server. So he clearly knows his Fiora, so I'm going to trust this build to an absolute T. For Fizz, I'm seeing a lot of people doing the Evelynn tactic, which is the Rabadon's Deathcap into Lichbane, just for huge 2-item burst. But this is a relatively good. You can't go wrong with this Fizz build. Rabadon's Deathcap, it's a Lichbane, Infinity Orb, Void Staff, and then Morello's at the end. Electrocute, Brutal, Hunter Titan, Hunter Genius. It's easy as you like if you can play Fizz. He's not particularly strong in the meta right now, but if you can do it, this is a build that will definitely carry games for you. So Galio has 2 major builds. Like you can play him mid and support most of the time. I like this support build. This build would also work relatively well in the Baron lane if you choose to play a Galio tank. you know, just running with the Abyssal Mask, it works so nicely with Galio. It's a great item for him. The Sunfire Aegis into the... I mean, honestly, if you're playing support, I probably wouldn't recommend going for the Hextech Belt. What I would say is that, you know, something like the Redemption is usually going to be better, or the Glory enchant. But Hextech Belt is great for engages. Glory is great for engages. Redemption and Locket, support builds, always very flexible. I'm going to say it again. Support builds are always very flexible. Rune choice, though, this is the best rune choice I think you can have. I would say that you want to have the standard support runes if you're playing support Galio, which is the Aftershock, Weakness, Loyalty, and Pack Hunter. However, you can also play him as a fighter mage, and in which case you might want something like this, where you're going to have Aftershock and Weakness still, because Aftershock's still the best rune for Galio. In my opinion, in the mid lane, the resistances on engage, especially when you're not building any resistances, come on, Kenan, say that word properly, resistances of your own, is, I think invaluable, but obviously you can play Electrocute if you want to go for the burst damage. Rod of Ages, Liandry's, Rabadon's Deathcap, Lichbane for the big power punch, and then also Void Staff as well. Works well in the mid lane. Either of these builds are great, but I play Galio mostly as a support these days, but you can definitely play him in the mid lane still. He's very, very viable. Recently did a video covering Garen, so the same build is going to apply to this video. Sunfire Cape, Deadman's Plate, just tanky boy stats. Like, Garen wants to be a tanky boy, right? So you go for the Stone Plate enchant too. Grasp of the Undying Champion, Regeneration, and Hunter Genius, all great great runes on Garen. He is just the best top laner, I think, right now, the best Baron laner in the game. Super tanky, very difficult to lose lane with, can sustain through very bad matchups as well, and still retains his utility as a tank, as well as his burst damage he can apply in team fights. Gragas is also very, very good, in my opinion, too. But yeah, loving Garen right now. I think he's super, super solid. Great Baron laner to play, and I actually really enjoy playing him too. So in my opinion, this is the best way to play Gragas. I'm not going to say that it's the only way to play Gragas, because there are a couple of ways to play it, and I'll show you another build if it's the correct one. But this is Tank Gragas, which I think is really viable and very strong, and with the Iceborne Gauntlet as well being added in, you can do quite a lot of damage with it. So Sunfire into Spirit Visage gives you lots of sustain. The Iceborne Gauntlet is going to give you that extra damage, and then to just full tank after that. Grasp of the Undying, it's like the tank versus tank rune. It's a really strong rune for Baron lane trades. And then a lot of sustain. Like, you can just become almost unkillable with this build, where you run Champion, Regeneration, and Honeyfruit, as well as Gragas' inbuilt sustain. However, you can still play... I mean, what is this build? All right, we're going to do this on the fly, everybody. We're going to do this on the fly. Nope. We want to go for that. We then want to go for... Everybody, where's Rabadon's Deathcap? There we go. Oh, it's here. We want to do that. We then want to do that. Wait a second. We want to do that. We want to do... There we go. There we go. We don't bloody want this either, do we? We want this. What are these runes? Christ on a bicycle. Probably just this. There we go. Cool. Here's a relatively good AP Gragas build. This is if you want to play AP Gragas, he's still very viable. Electrocute's a great rune with him. You can play him tank or AP if you like, but both builds work fine. Depends on your matchup as well. You may want to go AP into a matchup where you feel you can be a bit more aggressive, like the Darius, for instance. But yeah, AP Gragas or Tank Gragas, both very viable builds. Did this one on the fly. Sorry, you know, I'm running this video as a very, very long series of small video takes. You just got to see me build that one on the go, because whatever the build that Riot recommended was something else. Absolutely something else. Anyway, enjoy. Poor Graves kind of sucks. This build is okay with him, though. The Youmuu's into the... Guardian Angel with a bit of critical strike later on to follow up. That Last Whisper could be a death dance if you're not that bothered about getting through armor, for instance, and you have a little bit of extra sustain. You might want to swap out the Phantom Dance of a death dance instead if you need the Last Whisper to burst through tanks. It's really up to you. Not in a great spot though, Graves. I think until we get Phase Rush, he's going to be struggling a little bit. But in terms of runes, Fleet Footwork works okay with him. Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Mastermind. This is like a very, very strong build for a champion that isn't particularly strong. So if you want to play Graves, this one will work out relatively okay for you. Okay, Janna. I will absolutely swear by Rod of Ages Janna build. I don't care what anybody tells me. I absolutely love Rod of Ages Janna. But obviously, it really depends on the context of the situation. But, you know, with most enchanter supports, most shielding enchanter supports, the 3-item combo of Harmonic Echo, Athene's, and Ardent Censer is always going to be a relatively good combo to have in the bank. But I love Rod of Ages Janna. If you max your second ability first, you can really hit hard when you've picked up that item, and it's actually really, really good for actually acting as a carry as Janna. Something else that I love is Rabadon's Death Cap. Like, if you want to bring that into your build early on, that's great. Like, you may even want to bring it in after Harmonic Echoes, for instance, for the increased healing and the increased damage. Up to you. Runes, Summon Ahri, Weakness, Loyalty, and Hunter Genius. Good runes for Janna. But I love this build. I swear by it. You know, I'm going to hold my hands up and say I love it. It's, you know, it's one of my favorite builds. But what I would say is, you know, the redemption is usually like your first item choice. But with the Rod of Ages, I like to prioritize Rod of Ages over the redemption enchant, because the earlier you get the Rod of Ages, the better. It depends on the context of the game, though. If I need the redemption enchant for the first dragon fight, I'm going to need it, right? So I'm going to have to delay the Rod of Ages, or sometimes even skip it and go straight for just the Harmonic Echoes build. You know, I think realistically it's up to you. You don't have to build Rod of Ages. You could go for a very standard Harmonic Echoes, Athene's, Ardent build. But I like Rod of Ages because it gives me more carry potential. So I really like this Jarvan the 4th build that I saw from the rank 1 Jarvan player on Europe right now. Black Cleaver into Sunfire Aegis, Gargoyle enchant, although he went for Locket enchant, but I quite like Gargoyle because it makes you much tankier. Sterak's, and then into full tanky items like the things like Thornmail, for instance, Force of Nature, Frozen Heart, all of those things work. Again, those items do become flexible based on what you're facing. I like the rune choice, Conqueror, Brutal, and the Backbone, which gives you 10 armor or magic resist, depending on whichever stat you have less off, just gives you a little bit of extra resistances. I need to practice saying that word, but I usually prefer Hunter Titan really on junglers. Resistances. I just need to slow down saying it. Resistances. Guys, if there's one thing that I've learned from this video is that I can't say resistances quickly for some reason. And I'm English. It's like awful. What am I doing with my life? Jarvan, then. Yeah, let's get on with it. Okay, so this Jax build is pretty much the same as last time. Trinity Force is your biggest spike on Jax. You can go Trinity Force into Sterak's or Trinity Force into Blade of the Ruined King, depending on what you need. Like, Sterak's is obviously going to give you a little bit of extra health and defense, whereas Blade of the Ruined King, I think, is going to allow you to win more. I like to call it a bit of a win more item. It's also better in the longer duels. So, you know, you flex between what you want. Blade of the Ruined King or the Sterak's Gauge. Both items are great. Jax is a split pusher, though. So, you know, he's just going to be wanting to take towers as quickly as possible. For the most part, Jax is one of the quickest tower takers in the game, and so if you're playing Jax, you're going to want to aim to just keep taking towers in the side lanes and looking for the 1v1 duels, which is where Blade of the Ruined King is really going to help you out clearly. Conqueror, Brutal, Regeneration, and Honeyfruit, solid item choices. Barrier or Ignite, depends on what you want in the Baron lane. Can play him in the jungle. The build would be relatively similar, although I'd recommend going Sterak's from the jungle rather than the Blade of the Ruined King. But again, he's mostly suited to a Baron lane where, you know, you can get the edge and look for split push win pressure. Okay, Jhin. This has kind of been the standout Jhin build that I've seen being played a lot. The Youmuu's Ghostblade into Boots of Swiftness, Infinity Edge, Rapid Fire Cannon, Last Whisper, and then Guardian Angel. Fleet Footwork, Brutal, Spirit Walker, and then the Honeyfruit. Some people go for the Mastermind rune. I'm guessing because that makes your 4th shot deal a significant amount of extra damage to towers, potentially even steals objectives with it. But I think the safer rune overall is Honeyfruit. I don't think Mastermind would be the go-to for me in most circumstances. But this is a good Jhin build. If you want to play Jhin, this build will do well for you. It's played by the rank 1 Jhin player called Light. Very, very good player. I've seen him play. And, you know, the Youmuu's has come back as that first item for Jhin. People kind of realize that the movement speed is actually really impactful and will help Jhin out in sort of early fights, and it allows him to spike a little bit earlier into the game as well. All right, you guys would have seen this on my last video as well, the Jinx build that is relatively common. Kind of skipping the Blade of the Ruined King build, going straight for a critical strike orientated build with the Infinity Edge, RUNES, Rapid Fire Cannon, Last Whisper, and Guardian Angel. So no Blade of the Ruin King for Jinx here. You get a lot of your lifesteal primarily from your boots. You could also pick up the Hunter Vampirism room, which will obviously give you a bit of extra lifesteal depending on how many kills you manage to participate in. That's what one of the top Jinx players does on the servers. But again, you can also go for Brutal if you don't feel as comfortable going for one of the Hunter runes. Spirit Walker and Honey Fruit, relatively easy to play Jinx though. I think she's one of the easiest AD carries in the game to play. And so I think overall, this will get you, you'll do well with this Jinx build if you're looking to play her in ranked. So this Kai'Sa build remains popular, the same one, the Blade of the Ruin King into the RUNES Hurricane. What I would say though, is if you haven't already, go and check out It's Stuart's channel. He has a video talking about the fastest upgrade Kai'Sa build. So the build is, and if you go to It's Stuart's video, which I'll actually put in the description, is essentially BF Sword, Executioner's Calling Long Sword for your first ability upgrade, finish Blade of the Ruin King, and then go for an extra recurve bow. So you'll end up having Blade of the Ruin King, you'll have one recurve bow, one Executioner's Calling, and a long sword, and that will give you your first ability and your third ability upgrade. And eventually, you'll build that into Blade of the Ruin King, RUNES Hurricane, the what's it called? This thing, the Infinity Edge. And then eventually, once I put it in there instead, you'll have the Last Whisper in there as well. You don't necessarily need to go to Last Whisper. You could sell the Executioner's Calling, but obviously that will then allow you to build it into the Last Whisper. So this would be the overall item build for Kai'Sa towards the end of the game. But I'll put that video in the description if you want to go and check it out. So this is still the pretty standard Katarina build that I'm seeing on the ladder right now. The Hextech Gunblade into Infinity Orb, Rabadon's Deathcap Void Staff, and then Morello's towards the end with the Stasis Enchant in there. Runes, Electrocute, Brutal, and then 2 of the Regeneration runes because Katarina does have a pretty rough laning phase with a Barrier and Flash or Ignite and Flash depending on the matchup that you're going into. Easy Katarina build, not too hard to work with. But Katarina, obviously being a relatively tough champion to play, takes a lot of practice. So get some practice in with this build, and hopefully you can steamroll. So this Kennen build stays relatively similar from last time. Liandry's into Infinity Orb, into Rabadon's Deathcap, Morello's, and Void Staff. But we've changed out Electrocute to Conqueror. I mean, Conqueror still remains a strong rune for Kennen, and I think it's probably the best rune choice that you're going to get in most teamfight situations. Easy build, don't need to explain it too much. It's just a strong build for Kennen, gives him the execute potential below whatever it is, 35% HP. Yeah, below 35% HP, and then the Rabadon's just to follow it up. You get the regeneration rune because you have energy, so you're going to naturally regenerate health, which is nice, and obviously Hunter Genius because he is a cooldown reliant mage. Cool. Now we're going to move on to Kha'Zix. So this is the Kha'Zix player, rank 1 on the server right now. Kind of going for straight lethality, moving the Black Cleaver to later into the build. So Duskblade, Last Whisper, obviously with the Yomus, then a little bit later on goes for the Black Cleaver into the Guardian Angel if he gets there. Electrocute, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Mastermind. It is an easy jungle Kha'Zix build to follow. Gives you a lot of burst damage, a lot of snowball potential in the early game, which is super nice. However, Kha'Zix not in a super strong spot right now, but definitely worth giving this build a go if you enjoy playing the nasty little bug. Lee Sin build remains relatively similar. Most Lee Sins that you see in the game are going to go for the Ghost Blade into the Trinity Force build, which you can see on your screen right now. Upgrade in terms of what you can go for. Proto Belt is okay. Locket is okay. Sometimes Redemption. I think a lot of people go for Gargoyles as well to give him a little bit, or rather Stone Plate. I keep saying Gargoyles because it's Gargoyle Stone Plate, but I think actually Stone Plate's a relatively solid upgrade for Lee Sin because it makes him a little tankier in team fights, which is where he's always struggled. But this is a very standard item build for Lee Sin. You can't go too far wrong with this, and if you're playing it in your ranked games, you're going to do fine. Electrocute, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Mastermind. Don't really feel like I need to say the runes and everything out loud. You can see them on the screen, right? I think from now on, I'm just going to briefly talk about the build, and you guys can see the runes, and if there's anything that's out of the ordinary, I'll end up explaining it. So I think this Leona build still stands. Of course, you might not go for Locket. You might go for Redemption. Just based on what your team needs. Like Locket and Redemption, Locket obviously became a little worse. Now they made 800 gold, so Redemption's much easier to get for the first Drake fight, which is often where those enchants become much more important. But this build for Leona is one that I usually go for. Sunfire Cape Deadman's play, like loads of tanky stats, and again, as per usual, Defensive support builds are very flexible. You could also go for the Zeke's Convergence. I don't usually go for it, just mainly because I don't know if you get enough from the resistances, and I like to have. Why do I just go resistances? Can't say the word. Resistances. I mean, it's going to be a meme. It's going to be a bloody meme. Now, I play a lot of Lulu, so this build is relatively easy to work with. I would say Spooky Ghosts is very dependent. I've found that in general, Redemption has been better. But Ardent into Harmonic Echoes, into Athene's, into Rabadon's Deathcap is like the standard item build that I always go for Lulu. Summon Ahri, Weakness, Loyalty, and Mana Flow Band. Mana Flow Band's actually relatively important. The reason Mana Flow Band is important is because Lulu's mana issues are a little bit wonky in the laning phase. And so you can actually alleviate some of her mana issues by having Mana Flow Band as a rune, and it makes her much more sustainable, much more readily able to land poke in that laning phase. In terms of when you buy Redemption Enchant, gonna be honest with you, I usually end up buying it first. Otherwise, I'll rush Ardent for an attack speed AD carry. I would never pick Lulu if I wasn't with a AD carry that benefited from attack speed. So Ardent is always going to be a really sensible item to maximize the attack speed that you're giving to your AD carry. But otherwise, standard Lulu build hasn't changed a huge amount from last time. So Lux should be played as a support for the most part. I'm not going to show you a Mage Lux build because I think she's 10 times better in the support role right now. Similar to Lulu, but I go for Harmonic Echoes first on Lux for the most part because you're not always going to be with an AD carry that benefits from attack speed. In fact, like Lux Jhin rather is actually a really popular combination right now, and obviously Jhin doesn't massively benefit from attack speed, so therefore not always relevant. So I like to go for Harmonic Echoes first as Lux. I actually like to go then for Athene's, and I actually prioritize my Ardent a little later on, and then I tend to go for some AP items like the Rabadon's Deathcap. Runes almost identical to Lulu. You are just looking to poke as much as you can in lane. And the big thing about Lux is that you max her second ability, her shield first to support Lux. And she has some ridiculous shields as the game goes on. Really good late game scaling shield giver when it comes to supporting your team. Malphite build hasn't changed much. Sunfire into either Iceborne Gauntlet or the Abyssal Mask. It depends on who you're facing. Like if I'm going up against some AP, I'll go for the Abyssal Mask. If I'm going up against AD, I'll go for Iceborne Gauntlet. But that 3-item combination makes this tank Malphite more of a threat, and then you want to go for just some pure defensive itemization like the Thornmail and the Force of Nature. Can't go too far wrong with this build. Rune choice for Malphite is really kind of switch between two things. Either the Summon Ahri or the Grasp of the Undying. Summon Ahri is good for poking out in the lane, although I would say it's better if you're playing AP Malphite. The Grasp of the Undying is when you're going into melee matchups, and you're just going to want to proc that as much as you can. So, Grasp or Summon Ahri depends on the kind of matchup that you're going into. Grasp in general is the rune that you'll want, but if you're going into a matchup that you can't trade with, or you're going up into a ranged matchup, then you're going to want to go for Summon Ahri. You may want to consider going for a more AP build, but I don't recommend AP Malphite. I think playing tank Malphite is better for the team overall, but you can play AP Malphite, like you go Liandry's or you go Rod of Ages, especially as a first item. Then you can go into tank later on. It just depends on what the team needs, really. Yeah, I'm actually making a Master Yi build, not changing a huge amount from last time. Blade of the Ruin King into the Static Shiv, into the Infinity Edge, the Phantom Dancer, and Last Whisper. Obviously, you could thread in something like a GA in there. So, for instance, if you didn't want to run the Phantom Dancer, you could run a GA to give yourself a little bit more defensive capabilities. Honestly, up to you. Master Yi kind of useless, though. If you ever play him, you're just inting your team. But if you want to play him, these are the rune setups you might want. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and also Mastermind. However, I'll add a caveat. Master Yi is pretty good at low elo. For the most part, because at low elo, people don't generally tend to punish junglers who have a very slow early clear speed. So you'll find that at low elos, Master Yi can often kind of take over the game because not many people are able to punish him. And that's one of the reasons that you see Master Yi played a lot more at low elos. So I will concede that if you're trying to climb through like bronze and silver, you can actually play Master Yi and carry games with him because no one's really going to punish you. But once you start to get towards platinum and emerald, you might find that you start to lose out a little bit more trying to play this champion. So this is the rank 1 Misfortune player. Blade of the Ruin King, Infinity Edge Obviously, the Lifesteal Boots, Last Whisper GA, and then Rapid Fire Cannon. I changed out Gathering Storm. I've already explained why I hate that rune. So Conqueror, Brutal, and then the Mana Flow Band's the interesting one, but I think Misfortune does struggle with mana issues in the laning phase, so this just helps her be a bit more aggressive in that laning phase, land more double ups, be able to sort of cast a couple more abilities during that time. So I can see why the Mana Flow Band is picked up. However, for the most part, I always generally tend to like going for this combination on AD carries. If you're ever worried about what rune combination to go on AD carries, I think Spirit Walker into Sweet Tooth is a really good combo. But I thought I'd show you the rank 1 build before showing the build that I generally tend to default to on AD carries. So this very standard Nami build here. It looks very similar to other healing / shielding enchanters. The Redemption enchant into Harmonic Echoes, Athene's, Ardent, Rabadon's Death Cap there as well. You can kind of switch up the order of those 3 Harmonic Echoes, Athene's, and Ardent. I would always say that it's either going to be Ardent or Harmonic Echoes first, though. Going Athene's first usually isn't the best idea. In terms of rune choices, you kind of have a few options. There are 2 major rune choice options that you're going to want to think about. And this is the decision on Nami. In the laning phase, you're going to benefit much more from Summon Ahri. It's more poke heavy, plays towards Nami's strengths of being a lane bully, and can help you snowball the laning phase. However, one of the runes that has proved to be extremely successful in the late game for Nami has been the Font of Life, which it procs off the bubble, it procs off the Tidecaller Blessing slow, and also, if you hit your wave on the entire enemy team, everybody gets affected by Font of Life, and so therefore your entire team can sustain a massive amount of HP from attacking those that are affected by your wave. So it just depends on what you want. Laning phase, Summon Ahri is better. For the late game, Font of Life is better. This build won't go, you won't go too far wrong with this build, though. Very similar to Janna, very similar to any kind of major enchanter support, realistically, because Nami follows that same pathway. Okay, Nasus now. Looking at Nasus, like one of the common item builds that you kind of see on him right now is Trinity Force into Sterak's, into some more defensive options like the Spirit Visage for the healing that you get from your passive, and the Frozen Heart, which is going to give him loads of cooldown reduction to stack as quickly as possible. We like to stack on Nasus. One of the other item builds that you do sometimes see that is a little overlooked at times is the Iceborne Gauntlet instead of the Trinity Force. You don't want to double up on Sheen passive, so you never really go Iceborne Gauntlet and Trinity Force. But some people like to go Iceborne Gauntlet as an early item on Nasus. You get a lot of cooldown reduction or ability haste. It gives you the same kind of Sheen passive, but also scales up with any armor that you're building and makes you more tanky. So it is something that's worth considering on Nasus, but I won't go too much further into detail. Grasp of the Undying, Brutal, Regeneration, and Honey Fruit, because Nasus's early laning phase really sucks. So this is just to keep him as healthy as you physically can. Not a huge amount's changed for Olaf. The Trinity Force Sterak's combo with the Death Dance afterwards, very, very strong from the jungle. The Glory enchant to make sure you're engaging more readily, and I think it's probably the best enchant that you can go for on Olaf, unless you want to go for like a Locket or a Redemption to help your team. And then defensive itemization comes through depending on what you need. Like if you need armor, go for armor. If you need magic resist, go for magic resist. It's as simple as that. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and the Mastermind rune, the standard jungle rune combinations that you're going to see on most junglers, applies to Olaf as well. This Orianna build has remained relatively consistent. The Archangels into Liandry's into the Rabadons with then a Void Staff and a Infinity Orb as well. It's a really solid Orianna build. It's going to do you well, going to scale up well into the late game also. You also have things like the rune build rather than the Conqueror, the Brutal, Regeneration, and the Hunter Genius. That Regeneration could also be Spirit Walker. You might also want to go for the Honey Fruit if you feel like you're going to have a rough lane matchup. It really depends. But Regeneration is pretty solid because Orianna does have some early mana issues as well. So yeah, a relatively good Orianna build. You won't go too far wrong playing this one. So a lot of crazy Pantheon builds on the leaderboard. So I've had to kind of select and build one that I thought made the most sense. Most people playing Pantheon in the Baron lane right now over the jungle. Black Cleaver, Sterak's Gauge, GA, Death Dance, and then some kind of defensive item towards the end seems to be a common theme for most high-end Pantheon players right now. You can go for Conqueror, Brutal, Spirit Walker, and then also the Honey Fruit enchant. Very similar to what we see from Darkbreaker's Fiora, for instance. And this will do you well if you're playing Baron Lane Pantheon. This build can very easily work from the jungle as well. So if you want to play jungle Pantheon, don't fear. I'm sure this build will be just as good. Don't really think my Rakan build has changed much, apart from maybe switching out the the locket for the redemption. You might also obviously want to have that redemption built earlier on than your Zeke's. A lot of people like to go for their support item first, so like that boots enchant as first as quickly as possible. But the rune choice remains the same. I still believe Aftershock to be the best rune on Rakan, with the weakness, the loyalty, and the pack hunter as well. Not a huge amount changing with this Rakan build. Still think it's incredibly solid. You want to make Rakan as tanky as possible if you can. Some people like to go Harmonic Echoes on Rakan because of his shielding, but you don't really tend to build much AP. And I think AP Rakan, you end up, unless you get a really good engage, you end up dying too quickly. So just having a little bit more health and resistances are going to help Rakan. I said it okay there. Wow. Rakan, survive a little longer in those team fights. Okay, this would be an interesting Rammus build to consider. You might not want to go for the Abyssal Mask. You could potentially go for the armor earlier on, so like the Thorn Mail or whatever earlier on. As I always say, though, it very much depends on your game that you're going into and the types of damages that you want to defend against. But I think overall, this is a relatively solid Rammus build. Definitely go for the Sunfire Aegis first. It's going to help his clear speed massively. But then obviously the defensive itemization after that really follows. I think you go for an early Bramble Vest because it really synergizes with his second ability. So going for an early Bramble Vest is always a really good option. In fact, so much so that I might even just say switch those two over, because I think just getting an early Bramble Vest on Rammus is awesome. Aftershock, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and then actually one of the few champions that I really like giving Pathfinder to, because Rammus likes to go fast, and if you're in the jungle or you're out of combat or in the river, getting that extra movement speed is super nice, and it allows you to get round and gank a little bit more effectively. So that's why I like this particular rune on Rammus over most other. I don't really like it on almost any other jungler. I just really like it on Rammus. So I think this Renekton build has been very common for a lot of people. The Black Cleaver into the Death's Dance. It makes you very tanky and gives you a lot of ability haste, which is important for Renekton. And then the GA, the Spirit Visage, the Dead Man's Plate all work really nicely as kind of like later items. Some Renektons like to go Blade of the Ruined King because you can proc the Blade of the Ruined King instantly with your stun, your Ruthless Predator. It does make you quite squishy though, but does make you better in the 1v1. So the Blade of the Ruined King is a 1v1 item. It is not a team fight Renekton item for the most part, because it makes you don't get as much out of it than you'd get from going for like the Black Cleaver or the Death's Dance, for instance. But Blade of the Ruined King is very good in the 1v1, and if you're looking to split push as Renekton or you want to deal with a split pusher, Blade of the Ruined King is going to help you be more effective against them. Conqueror, Champion, Regeneration, and Hunter Genius are all absolutely fine runes for Renekton to consider in the Baron lane. I do want Renekton to see some buffs though. I don't think he's in a particularly strong spot right now. So this is the #1 Rengar build being used on the server right now. Youmuu's into Trinity Force. Rengar does use Trinity Force relatively well. It makes his first ability hit really hard. So therefore, Trinity Force is still a good item for Rengar to consider from the jungle. And this guy goes for pure burst damage. Infinity Edge into Phantom Dancer, like no holding back, looking to burst a target instantaneously. And I love it. I'm here for it. I didn't think this would be the Rengar build that we'd see more of, but instead of going down like the Duskblade or Drakthar route, the only thing that I would say is that you might get more value about going for Duskblade or Drakthar over the Youmuu's Ghostblade, because you can make more use of it with your ultimate. Up to you though. The Youmuu's Ghostblade is going to give you a bit more movement speed. Duskblade or Drakthar is going to synergize better with your ultimate. I think either or could be really good, depending on what you want. I think because since we lost the extra damage from Youmuu's Ghostblade, it has become less powerful than I think this Duskblade or Drakthar. So Duskblade or Drakthar could be a good item for Rengar in this situation. So Seraphine mid is being played a lot, but I generally tend to play her support. However, with Seraphine mid, the build can be relatively similar, and so will just depend on, like how you're going to go about it. But with Seraphine support, I still love to go for Luden's Echo first item, because I think you want to be dealing as much damage as you can as Seraphine. Like, one of the big benefits of Seraphine support is she can deal a lot of damage, and I feel like from support, if you're going for Luden's first, you can be much more carry orientated. But in the mid lane, you're going to want to go for Luden's first anyway. For the most part, though, I think the safest place to play Seraphine, unless you're really, really good with Seraphine, is in that support role. And I like to go Luden's into Harmonic Echoes, into Rabadon's Deathcap. I love the damage on Seraphine, Athene's, and then Ardent if I really want it. But Harmonic Echoes really works with her second ability as well, so that's nice to see also. But I love going Luden's Echo first item on Seraphine support, even though it's not really a support item. Seraphine is very, very adept at dealing insane amounts of damage, and that's why I really like going for it. In terms of builds, Summon Ahri, weakness because you apply a lot of CC, loyalty in the support role, and mana flow ban just to alleviate some of Seraphine's early mana issues. For Shyvana, this seems to be the relatively common build that I'm seeing on her right now. The Trinity Force into Blade of the Ruined King, into Sterax with the Stone Plate enchant, Guardian Angel, and then either like a Randuin's Omen or a Thormail or a Force of Nature, sometimes Death's Dance. But that last item, you never usually get to the point in the game where that last item is relevant, but make a sensible decision based on what you're facing. If you need some extra magic resistance, then go for the Force of Nature. If you're thinking of you going up against lots of AD, then clearly go for the Thormail. Or if you just want to be like pure damage output with a little bit of defensiveness, then the Death Dance is clearly something to go for. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Mastermind. And of course, with Shyvana, make sure you are contesting and getting those dragons. Okay, Singed. Similar build to that you saw last time. Liandry's and Rhyalize being the two item combo that most top Singed players go for. The Swiftness boots with the Glory enchant, and then you're just going for some defensive itemization like Force of Nature, Randuin's Omen, Thormail, whatever suits you. Of course, this person's also tagged on a Morellonomicon at the end, so if you want to have a bit of healing reduction in a team fight, that's what it's going to be there for. A lot of Singed go between two major runes. Aftershock, which you apply when you go for a flip. So if you're running into a team fight and you flip someone, you're going to get the resistances that Aftershock provides you. Or Conqueror, because obviously if you're running around dealing damage to people, you're clearly going to stack Conqueror stacks, and this is going to increase your damage over time. Just to give you context on Conqueror, you're going to get per stack 3 to 9 AP depending on your level for 6 seconds, and it goes all the way up to 5 stacks. So you can get 45 AP at the max level from Conqueror. And fully stacked bonus, you're going to get a bonus adaptive damage, ranged champions, and so Singed is going to get 10% extra damage to champions when he's got fully stacked Conqueror. I like Weakness because of Rhyalize, the same reason I talked about it on Aurelion Sol. I think it's one of the better runes in this circumstance. And then Hunter Titan, and then also the Honey Fruit enchant. Sona build remains similar. You definitely want to be getting a tier on Sona, which you'll eventually upgrade into a Archangel staff. The reason being that you have so many high mana costs. Your mana usage as a Sona is absolutely ridiculous, and therefore mana flow band and your tier is going to be crucial to keeping you sustained throughout the game. Other than that, normal kind of AP build, or rather Enchanter build with the Harmonic Echoes, the Athenes, and the Ardent if you need it. If not, go straight to the Rabadon's Death Cap. Summon Ahri because you're obviously dealing poke damage in lane. Brutal just to give you that little extra punch in the early game with the loyalty, and then the mana flow band as your rune. Okay, Soraka, similar vein to a lot of other enchanter supports, but we add in the Warmogs because we want to get to 2,500 maximum health, because Soraka needs it to sustain her healing abilities. Other than that, the build is relatively consistent with other normal enchanter builds, like the Ardent Sense is going to give you some health, the Harmonic Echo to give you some healing capabilities or extra healing capabilities, Athenes and Holy Grail eventually towards the end to also buff up that healing capability too. Summon Ahri because you are looking to poke and also shield as well. We like to attack and protect, a bit of an old meme, but there we go. I actually quite like Triumph on Soraka because if you get an assist, you're going to get 10% of your missing health back. So if you just get a little assist, even cross map or in the middle of a team fight, it could prove crucial to helping continue to heal your team. So that's why I like this particular rune, the Triumph rune. Then Loyalty and then Mana Flow Band again to help with some mana issues in the laning phase. Teemo build from the number one Teemo player, and who am I to argue with the number one Teemo player who goes the RUNES Hurricane last item? Why not? But for the most part, your early items here make a lot of sense. Liandry's. What I would say is actually, do you know what? I can't on good conscience do this. I really think that this is the play. I can't on good conscience tell you to build RUNES Hurricane, even though it probably makes sense in a way. I just think you need the Rabadon's Death Cap for that extra burst damage. Also, it synergizes with Nash's Tooth. Like, you deal 15 magic damage plus 15% of your bonus AP, which is obviously going to be buffed up by Rabadon's Death Cap. But regardless, this is the Teemo build. Liandry's, Nash's Tooth, Rabadon's Death Cap, Void Staff, Morellonomicon. Summon Ahri, because you are more about the poke in the laning phase as Teemo, with Brutal to be a little bit more aggressive early on, Regeneration and Honey Fruit, just to keep yourself as safe as possible. Feel free to try it out. I don't play much Teemo, but this is the rank 1 Teemo build to an extent, so go give it a go. Okay, Tristana. So, this is the rank 1 Tristana players build, going for the Blade of the Ruined King in the early game, which is not something that I classically associate with Tristana. But, you'll get some extra sustain. It might help you versus some of the higher HP targets in those mid-game fights. Into Infinity Edge, Static Shiv, and the rapid fire cannon to give you as much critical strike damage as physically possible, finishing off with the last whisper, or the mortal reminder rather. Conqueror, brutal, spirit walker, and honey fruit. Spirit walker and honey fruit being, or brutal, spirit walker and honey fruit being a very standard AD carry rune setup, which, as I said before, you can pretty much use on any AD carry that you like. I'm not going to change the Tryndamere build because I think it works perfectly fine. Blade of the Ruin King. I would say though that this might be better off, especially if you're trying to do some burst damage to someone. It might be better off going for the proto belt, just giving you that extra little bit of gap closing capabilities. But Blade of the Ruin King, Infinity Edge, Phantom Dancer, Bloodthirster for all that extra sustain, and then obviously the Guardian Angel towards the end as well. This will have you'll have loads of lifesteal in this build. You should be able to scale up pretty nicely. The one thing that you could consider over Bloodthirster, which I know that some Tryndameres are, is going for something like this, where you have a little bit of an earlier mid-game spike with the Blade of the Ruin King into Static Shiv. Definitely worth considering. Try either of them. Let me know how they go. Although you would have to play Tryndamere to make that work, so that's on you. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and also Hunter Genius as well. But of course, if you're struggling in the laning phase, you could go for like the standard kind of like I need to survive the laning phase build, especially because Tryndamere doesn't have mana. Regeneration works nicely, and Regeneration and Honey Fruit are also like this is like the I need to survive the laning phase rune combination. So this Twisted Fate build has been kind of floating around quite a lot. I'm not sure I'm a big fan of the proto belt, but I do like the stasis here. So Rod of Ages, Lichbane into the rapid fire cannon for the extended range on your stun, or which, you know, whatever card you're delivering in that sense. But yeah, here we go. Also the Rabadon's Death Cap and the Void Staff. The Electrocute for the single target burst damage for Twisted Fate, although obviously Conqueror works really well on him as well. Brutal, Spirit Walker, and Honey Fruit. All of these are, it's a relatively solid Twisted Fate build that has been playing. You know, this kind of combination of this is being played on the top of the ladder. As I said before, you've got a choice between Conqueror and Electrocute. Some people like to play Electrocute for the single target burst. Some people like to play Conqueror because you tend to be in team fights so a lot longer as Twisted Fate. Up to you. You decide which one works best for you. Did a video on this yesterday, and even though there's AP Varus builds on the leaderboard, I still believe this to be a super strong Varus build. And so I do recommend you go and check out the video that I did on Varus yesterday to really see this in its full glory. But Manamune, Yomu's into Last Whisper, the Duskblade of Drakthar, and the Guardian Angel. If you are not confident going for the Proto Belt Engage, you could also go for the Stasis. And what I would say is that for the most part, cooldown boots are probably better overall because you're not going to be basically taking a huge amount, you know. But obviously you can go for the lifesteal boots, but they're not going to get you a huge amount out of them. So whereas cooldown boots means more arrows means more damage. Bob's your uncle. Summon Ahri to poke in lane, champion just to deal as much damage in the laning phase as possible, and then Hunter Titan and also Honey Fruit. You could also go for the Spirit Walker, which seems to be the common AD carry rune right now as well. Okay, Vayne. This is like a standard Vayne build that, you know, scales up into the late game. Vayne doesn't necessarily need... honestly, Vayne doesn't necessarily need Last Whisper unless you're looking for healing reduction. Mainly because Vayne's main damage comes from true damage, so Last Whisper is never really a hugely important item on her. Something like GA could be subbed in towards the end of the build here, but Blade of the Ruin King, Static Shiv, Infinity Edge, Phantom Dancer is a strong Vayne build right now. Conqueror, Brutal, Spirit Walker, and Honey Fruit. And as I said, Spirit Walker and Honey Fruit seems to be the go-to AD carry item combination in terms of runes. This is the #1 Vi build, a bit of a shift up from the Vi build in the previous video, straight into Trinity Force, Guardian Angel, and then the boot enchant is often between Locket and the Stoneplate enchant. Sterex Gauge later on into some full defensive items towards the end of the game. So this is the skipping out on the lethality, skipping out on the Umbral Glaive, just going straight into the Triforce, which is something that obviously works really well with Vi's kit. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, Hunter Genius. Okay, my phone is almost out of battery. This has taken this long. I've been running Wild Rift from 100%, and my phone is now at 15%. So my phone's almost out of battery. I'm going for a speed run through the end of this video. Wukong, you saw it in a video the other day. This is like the tanky Wukong build that we're seeing floating around right now. I wouldn't say it's like 100% the best Wukong build out there, but it is an interesting build that is being used quite a lot in competitive, as well as the high-level players on the ladder. Go and check out the video for more details on it, but Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, Mastermind, standard jungle runes realistically for Wukong. GA Black Cleaver into essentially full tank items. It's worth checking out. I'm not entirely certain that it's the best Wukong build out there, but it is a Wukong build that makes you more tanky and keeps you in the front line for longer, which is pretty good. Okay, really quickly, this is Xayah now. Infinity Edge, Rapid Fire Cannon, Last Whisper, the Phantom Dancer into GA. A lot of people going for the Ravenous Hunter or the Hunter Vampirism rune if you are not actually looking to build something like Blade of the Ruined King to give you a little bit extra boost in terms of lifesteal. And if you're going Hunter Vampirism, you may as well go Hunter Titan because you're looking to stack up on your Hunter runes here. And obviously then going for the Honey Fruit towards the end of this Xayah build as well. I'm sorry that I'm speedrunning the last maybe like 4 that we've got left. My phone is going to run out of battery, so I kind of have to do this. Xin Zhoa, very, very strong in the jungle right now. Well, no, he's not. That's a lie. What am I talking about? Xin Zhao's okay. He's all right. He does okay. Trinity Force into Sterak's, Gargoyle or the Stoneplate enchant, Death's Dance, and then some defensive items towards the end. Conqueror, Brutal, Hunter Titan, and Mastermind standard jungle runes. You know the deal by now. You've watched the majority of the video. This build will work for Xin Zhoa relatively well. The number 1 Yasuo build on the server, Static Shiv into Infinity Edge, Lifesteal Boots, Blade of the Ruined King into Guardian Angel. He finishes off with a Trinity Force, which seems really random, but I guess it does make sense for the context of a Yasuo. And I know Trinity Force can work pretty well on the Yasuos as well, but it's better to head towards a critical strike build path with Yasuo early on, and if you want to go for Trinity Force later on, that's definitely plausible. Conqueror, the double Hunter runes with the Honey Fruit makes perfect sense in the same way they did for Xayah. If you're stacking Hunter Vampirism, you're going to want to stack Hunter Titan as well, and then obviously Honey Fruit. Number 1 Zed build on the server, Duskblade of Drakthar, Youmuu's into Black Cleaver, interestingly enough, and I guess that's because there aren't many other good items for Zed that offer enough ability haste. And one of the things, as you can see as a theme with this build, is that with the Hunter Genius, Zed relies on getting low cooldowns on his abilities as much as he physically can. Duskblade of Drakthar, 10 ability haste, 10 ability haste, 25 ability haste on the Black Cleaver. So just getting that ability haste stacked for Zed is important. Electrocute because you're single target focused with the Brutal Regeneration, and obviously, like I said, Hunter Genius. This is the number 1 Zed player on our server's build. And finally, Ziggs. Yeah, this is the Luden's Echo into Rabadons, into Liandry's, Infinity Orb, and Void Staff. You may even want to switch out Void Staff for Infinity Orb early on to just penetrate through some magic resistance. It's up to you. Depends on the context of the game situation. Obviously, Conqueror, Champion, because you're not supposed to die easily as Ziggs. You just want to get that extra burst damage, might help you out through some of the early fights. Spirit Walker and Honey Fruit. And that is the end of the video. Before my phone runs out of battery, we are basically there. Oh, this took me a long time. 2 hours of constant talking to record. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helps you, and I really do hope that you climb the ranks with some of these builds from our top ranked players.